Hi, everybody. This is Paul, and I'm back with my friend Job. And we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and Job had some follow-up he wanted to do. So what's on your mind, Job?
Yeah, the Paul and Job comedy hour.
Two bald Dutch guys. Well, one's really Dutch and the other not.
Yeah, but I'm short, and you're a real tall person, so you're more Dutch than I am in some ways.
I was talking, I'm going to post a conversation with a guy named Dennis, who's also from the Netherlands, and he was watching my videos, and he was like, the guy, he looks Dutch. He's got a Dutch face, so I'm not sure what a Dutch face means, but I guess I got one.
I don't know, man. I mean, no, it's more about like who drowns when the dikes break. You got to be tall.
That's exactly right. That's why the Dutch are so tall.
Right.
We lived.
No, I think I'm 5'7" in American lengths, so
which is about average, actually. It's people like me that are freaks.
Yeah, well, that's just your privilege. You'll have to suffer with that.
That's right.
That's your life.
I need to own my tall privilege.
Exactly. How dare you be so happy about it? So, okay, we've had two conversations before, and I think I've omitted a thing, not on purpose, but I just didn't think about it. That has been kind of, I think it's important. So in my first talk to you, I kind of explained, how I got here, and that I've kind of had a history of depression since I've been about 11, as far as I can tell. Wow. That manifested itself as a basically constant voice in my head that's always like, you need to just kill yourself. And that would go from just always kind of be there to being very loud. And then you can't even read a book. You can't kind of have a conversation because it's just distracting you. And I kind of learned to deal with that, deal as far as I could. I mean, it's not been fun, but I need to kind of get to where I want to go in the conversation. I think 2 years ago, I went to work, as I always do. And I walked to work, and I noticed there was nothing there. Like, it was just quiet. And I was like, this is weird. Like, okay, so how about we think about death? Because that usually throws my mind into a kind of the old wagon wheel of, oh, everything is meaningless, and why not just end it, because all it is suffering, and just, yeah. So whenever I think about death, that's where it would go. And that would usually happen without any conscious effort on my mind. Like, my brain would just go there. Like, oh no, do we have to go here? Well, let's hope that, that goes away after a while, because eventually that cycle stops. But anyway, my brain was like, no, we don't need to think about that at that certain day. And I'm like, wow, what is this? So I have a great day at work. Then I come home and I tell my wife, you wouldn't believe the day I had. And she's like, yeah, that's odd, because she knows how my mind works. And the next day as well. I'm like, oh, wow, what is this? What did I do? And then third day. And then a fourth day. And then I went back to normal. I'm like, oh, no. But I had 4 days of just existing. And I figured, hey, okay, now I'm going to go see a therapist. Because it's like, Plato's cave, and you come out of it, and like, hey, there's this whole other world out here that's possible. And I went to see a therapist. And that was funny, because I went to see this therapist. I was basically like, okay, buddy, this is how it's going to go. I'm going to tell you what I think is wrong. You're going to advise me to take meds. And then I'm going to get the meds, and we'll have this fixed. It's like, no, tell me about your youth. Like, what? How is that? How is my youth relevant? But this guy was good, because he kind of digs and pokes. Yeah. And he's like, so you're saying you're this horrible person, but okay, so you're married, right? I'm like, yeah. And you have this wife. Yeah. And you have a good relationship. Yeah. Well, why is she with you? And my mind goes, error. Like, oh yeah, that's interesting. Why is that? I guess I must be very nice to her. And he's like, no, you're just a really good person, but you need to see that. And he's like, we had an hour and a half kind of introductory meeting to see what was going on. He's like, what you need to do, and I think there's lots more here, but what you need to do is to learn how to love yourself. I'm like, yeah, whatever. All right, bye, doc. And well, fuck that. That was useless. And I didn't see it yet, but that guy was spot on. He knew exactly where to poke. And then we kind of, after a couple of months, we come to the first conversation I had with you, where I said I found this Peterson, and I kind of had just gotten back into Stoicism. And through Stoicism, I kind of developed the system of all that matters is your next action. As long as I perform my next action as well as I can, as virtuous as I can, then all I have to worry about is that, and maybe that'll keep all the other stuff at bay. Now, it didn't, but it helped. But if I think about it now, like, that's very Peterson-esque in a way. Like, you need to, everything is meaningful. If you don't go for the nihilism thing, everything is meaningful. And that's when I ran into your videos, and now we're basically back to our first conversation, where I said your first video that I saw was axiomatic God versus materialistic God. And I see now, I still almost forget what I needed to discuss with you, because there's a correlation that I didn't see. And I don't think I told you this. Around that time where I started watching your videos, Mallory had been experimenting with fasting. Have I told you this?
No.
Okay. Just to see how it would affect her blood pressure, her mood, just kind of a science experiment. And she would fast for like 2 weeks, a week, and she would talk to me about it, and she would watch me eat, which is really happily eating. She's just,
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, but she would talk about how it affected her, and she says, maybe you want to try this at some point. So I tried, and it's really hard the first 3 days, but after that, your hunger kind of goes away. But I also noticed that everything else went away, and I got a really strong focus. Like, everything got very clear and focused, and that's also because you're very hungry. But so what happens is you go in a state called ketosis,
right,
where your liver creates ketones, and you start burning fat instead of using glycogen and carbohydrates, or I don't know the details of it. But I also noticed that my digestive issues went away, which I never really made any link with those. I just, that's just what I had. But that went away, and I just felt really good. Like, oh, okay, so I'm going to keep doing this. And I've been doing that for like 9 months now.
Wow.
And it's been consistently good. I'm no longer depressed. All this other stuff is great. And I just didn't make the link there, but it did kind of navigate me into thinking about things differently, because I can now.
Yeah.
So I don't know how relevant this is, but it could be relevant to people who struggle with similar problems. I have no idea what the science of this is. I have no idea if it works on other people. I can't vouch for anybody. I just know that because I experimented, whenever I introduce carbohydrates and sugars again, I fall back. I get these symptoms again of, digestive and brain. So there's some sketchy science out there that suggests that the gut biome influences the brain, and that works with stuff I've learned from a neuroscientist who says, well, that mind-body problem that we think of, that's not really what we're way more one thing that we realize. Like, Descartes was kind of wrong there. That's a guy called Antonio Damasio, I believe, neuroscientist, and he did research on people with damage in their prefrontal neurocortex. Mm-hmm. And he found that people with damage their emotions were imparted, and they could no longer see the consequences of their actions. And so that research shows that emotions are essential to acting. We can't act without thinking. But the more I read about it, like Jean Piaget said this, he says you can't even think about mathematics without having emotions about it. But he found that people like Phineas Gage, the rail worker who had the rod come through his head, very famous case. Are you familiar with him?
A little bit.
His emotions, he became this whole different person.
Right.
They did gambling tests with people with damage in the part of their brain, and they kept making the same mistakes. I'm basically talking about, this is my disability sociology and psychology presentation I'm half giving to you now. But anyway, but yeah, we perceive the world as meaning, and it's like it all comes together at that point. Where was I going with all this?
So you're fasting, and you're finding fasting really helps.
Well, the fasting led me to get into that state of ketosis. And I notice as long as I stay in that state of just only eating fat and protein, basically, and mostly fat, I'm just, life has been so incredibly amazing and great and meaningful. And then of all the religion stuff that comes with it, it only seems to help more.
Yeah.
And maybe it's even partially responsible. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. The hardest part is to keep to get my calories in. Like, I need to eat very fatty food, and that's just to get full. So I've been losing weight like crazy, and I got to watch that. But yeah,
I'm not surprised by anything you've said, and I've got, family and friends and people in my church who, are on all different sides of these debates. And of course, Peterson with his carnivore diet, Peterson and his daughter. So I'm not really surprised by anything you've said. I know fasting has become sort of a fad among some Silicon Valley people. Obviously religious traditions have used fasting for as long as there have been religions. So I'm not surprised by anything you've said. And, it sounds like a very wonderful thing that you and your wife have stumbled onto.
Literally stumbled on. Imagine if I'd never found this. Like, I would probably still be stuck in the same rut, just kind of trying to power through all the shit.
Yeah.
And my wife and I were at sign language, and that's always fun. And my wife was signing, and I'm kind of looking at her, and I get this immense sense of just thankfulness that I have, such a great wife, because she really is. And I'm thinking, yeah, and it's so nice to have, and that I used to have this really shitty outlook on life and negative, and my other part of my brain goes, misery, deliverance, gratitude. Like, no, we're like, oh, wow. So that's what that is. That was just, that was really interesting to realize.
That's very cool.
That's really what it seems to be.
That's very interesting.
Like, that's like 34 years of, well, not 34, but at least, a good 20 years of shit.
Mm.
And of course, it's not always bad, but it always has that undercurrent of negativity.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I meant when I said, like, it's kind of personal, this sort of stuff, but maybe it can help other people.
Yeah. And again, just the normal YouTube disclaimer, neither Job nor I are doctors, and we're not advocating anyone stop eating, but
no, oh God, no.
Your mileage may vary, but no, there's a lot to, there's a lot. So I'll use the example of my dog. So my dog had perpetual skin problems, and he would get these yeast infections, and he would stink because of the yeast infections. And you'd take him to the vet, and the vet visit would cost $200, and then the pills, and pouring hundreds of dollars into this rescue dog, and the dog's miserable, and would just go through this cycle. And so my wife just, well, let me go on the internet and find something. So she came back and she said, okay, we're just going to feed the dog raw meat and some vitamins, and that's it.
That's a happy dog.
Well, he's a much happier dog. The skin infections have gone away. The yeast infections have gone away. There's always some other stuff. The dog's almost blind, but and he's still kind of a jerk, but that's his temperament. But he still likes to bite people. But for the most part, you know, and yeah, it was just diet, and it sure is nice not having to take him to the vet all the time and give him all these drugs, and so there's a lot
Yeah.
to that.
And I mean, yeah, the dog's mileage may vary, and might not work for another dog, but
Yeah.
And I didn't do the purely meat thing because no, and luckily I didn't have to. Luckily, this seems to be enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a fair amount of stuff that we can talk about, Paul. So
Go right ahead. Time is yours.
okay, episode 1 of Paul's bookshelf. I'm just forcing the issue.
I don't have, and I'm in a room where I don't have any of my books here, but I do, of course, have my Kindle library available on my computer. So go for it.
I was thinking we could say, so Paul, what did you think about Paul? And I mean the biography by NT Wright, because I think you read that.
I read about 3/4 of it or 2/3 of it. I really liked it. I got to see, I'm ADHD, so I get distracted by another book. It's amazing. I've, you know, managed to stay married to my wife 31 years and, you know, haven't, you know, gone off. But so no, I actually thought it was, in terms of NT Wright's non-technical work, one of my favorite books of his. He so, you know, you can see him, he's getting to the point now in his life and his career where he can really integrate a lot of what he's learned and done over the years. And a lot of it comes together nicely in that book. Plus, he gives a lot of the historical background, contextual detail in that book in an accessible way, which is, you know, it's part of the difficulty we have when we read the New Testament in a different language from a very different time and place. There's so much that is lost if you don't know the context, and Wright brings some of that into the book. So I thought I really enjoyed it. So I've really got to finish it. I'll probably start it all over again because I don't want to jump in 2/3 of the way through and then I'll listen to the first part again. But I don't have a problem with that because I learn when I go through things multiple times. So what did you think? Did you read it?
Yeah. I listened to it. It's an adventure story. The guy is basically a zealot, and he's basically let's say he's far left and becomes far right. He goes from one side to the other.
Yeah.
Basically halfway on this road to Damascus, he's like, boom, you're going to do this now. You're going on an adventure.
Yeah.
And it's not the adventure you thought you were going to have.
No.
And this guy had, I would say, he had power in the sense that he would just push through in some fanatical sense. Like, oh, I got stoned. Well, it's just a scratch, and moves on and preaches so long that people fall asleep and tumble out the window, goes down. Did I tell you to leave? Heals them, goes back. I wasn't done preaching, and very much endless energy, endless power person. And I wonder if that's the sort of power that Mabel had, Mabel in her wheelchair, that endless just will to move forward.
You know, so all Christians say that their goal is to become like Christ, but the form that takes is individual to every person. So you've got the Apostle Paul, you've got Mabel from the John Ortberg book that I've read and other things, and so it's amazing that what Christ does in us is both make us like him and also make us ourselves. Because you would think, well, if we're all going to be like Christ, we'll all be like this one thing, but it's actually not at all like that. And that stands to reason if you think of the long-term story of basically, creation, corruption, redemption. Redemption is the undoing of corruption, which differentiates us, and in some ways makes us way more extreme, and in other ways makes us way more loving, because we so often associate extremism with the opposite of love. And Jonathan Edwards, who was one of the greatest American philosopher, theologians who ever lived, he was in the colonial period. One of the things that he noticed about Jesus is that in Jesus you find strange excellencies that we normally can't put together in one person. Because often if someone is compliant, they'll also be sort of weak. And often if someone is willful, they'll also be uncaring and not gentle in their courage. And so what Jonathan Edwards noticed in Jesus was that he could be humble, yet say he's the Son of God. He could be strong, yet, as the prophet Isaiah said, the bent reed he would not break, and the smoldering wick he would not snuff out. And so in Paul, you see some of that. But then when you say, look at two saints like that story of Mabel and Paul, and you say, well, how can both of these be reflecting Jesus? Well, Jesus is reflected in them, but they are also themselves. So the kind of transformation Jesus brings in us makes us, it kind of sounds cliche, but it makes us who we were made to be. But also, so Paul is this, like you said, he's an extremist. I mean, when he would, in the book of Acts, he would go into a town, and he'd have death threats. He'd be stoned. He'd have to sneak out. His followers would basically almost have to kidnap him to get him out of there because they don't want him to die. And so he's just this amazing extremist, but he's not just an extremist. And so you're right in that. So then you look at someone like that Mabel in that story, in that nursing home, who's had, absolutely everything taken from her, but she's brimming with joy. And you'd say, how can a person suffer so much adversity and loss and brim with joy? And it's exactly that Christ does. And it's unexplainable. That's why we call it miraculous, but that's the pattern.
Yeah.
So then what's funny is, so Christianity talks about sanctification, and basically sanctification means God refines you, and he does so usually through suffering, which is not the way any of us want to be refined. Much more through suffering than through success usually, but he makes you into a purified, better you, not anyone else, you. And that stands to reason if you think about God's project for us in this story, which is he is realizing in us when we talk about potential with the Peterson stuff, he's realizing in us our potential. And see, now you and I, we tend to think about our lives as, well, I want things to go the way I want them to go, and then I'll be happy. It never works that way. And so God says, no, I am going to do things in your life that you are going to hate. And there are things that I'm going to do to you that are going to really make you wonder whether I love you. But this is my plan for you, and I am going to complete it.
You're telling this to a guy called Job. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The guy named after the guy who, and so I was preaching Sunday. I forgot to record the sermon at church, but It's on the Facebook page. But, there's this, in John chapter 9, there's a man born blind, and everybody wants to know who sinned, his parents or him. And Jesus says, no, that's not at all it. It's that God's glory would be revealed. And it's like, wait a minute. This guy's lived his whole life blind so that your glory could be revealed. On one hand, we as human beings are terribly offended at that. So who are you, God, to make those kinds of decisions about us? That reflects our sense of entitlement, but God kind of looks at that like Job and says, who are you? That's basically what God says back to us. Oh, little center of the universe.
Yeah. I didn't recall giving you an opinion. Yeah.
That's right.
Asking for your opinion on this. Yeah. Speaking of that, John is kind of humorous at times almost. So you said I think you advised me last time to start learning and reading the Gospels.
Yeah.
That's actually interesting because recently I asked Melody, so what are you going to do today? She's like, I'm going to read the Bible. I'm like, what? And she says, well, I notice I don't know anything about it, so I should at least know what's in it. So I will read the New Testament. I said, well, go start with Mark it's the shortest one. And then you at least start with the Gospels. So she's been reading Mark and Matthew, and I've been reading Luke and John. And John is just like the blind man. And I think it's the Pharisees who ask him, like, yeah, who made you see? And he's like, well, it's this guy, Jesus, and this and that. And then I ask him again, like, so who made you see? And like, I just told you, like, it's Jesus. Why do you also want to become disciples? Is that why you keep asking? There's sarcasm in the story. And then later, I think Jesus is talking to a bunch of people and also the Pharisees, where he talks about the gate and the sheep, and that there's a gate and the shepherd and the sheep, and the certain sheep go in the. And the Pharisees don't get it. Like, he's talking about sheep, and you can almost hear Jesus go, right. So see, the gate, that's me, right? And the sheep, that's these people, right? Do you get it? It's no fun if I need to explain the metaphor. And you can just imagine the guy at some point just gets really tired. Like, I need to keep trying. I need to keep trying to reach these people. So when the Buddha reaches enlightenment, Brahman comes to him and says, you need to teach others. And Buddha says, well, but they won't understand. That's at least how one version of the story goes. And Brahman says, but there might be some people who will. Like, there are some people with less sand in their eyes than others. And Buddha thinks, well, maybe if there are a couple, then I could go out and teach them. And then at least I've helped some people. I imagine Jesus had similar ideas, like, well, and then the apostles start bricking, like, I'm going to be at the right hand of Jesus. No, it's going to be me. And like, well, you guys knock it off. You bunch of children. Like, well, you picked the illiterate fisherman. I mean, what did you expect? That it's when you I don't know, maybe I'm blaspheming by interpreting the stories that way, Paul.
No, you're not. The Gospels are terribly hard on the apostles, which is an amazing thing since they come through them, and they don't come off well in the Gospels. The apostles basically come off as a bunch of knuckleheads, and Jesus keeps losing his temper at them. Oh, you of little faith, he keeps saying. He says, how, and he says to his apostles, how long am I going to have to deal with you people? That's what he keeps saying to them.
And at some point, he explains to us the stuff, and they don't get it. And like, Jesus realizes they don't get it. Like, and they kind of want to ask a question, but they don't dare. Like, do you want to ask me a question about what I just said? Because you're clearly not getting it. Let me try again. Please, Father. I'm trying.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, it's man. So yeah, we've been reading that stuff, and we are listening to Bart Ehrman on Audible about the New Testament.
Oh boy.
It's historical. And so we also bought his book, How Jesus Became God. But then we figured we also need the other one, which is called How God Became Jesus. We figure we need to hear both sides. No, seriously. It's actually really funny. I should read. I'm going to read you some. For instance, the worship of a crucified and risen Messiah was definitely unique and incredibly scandalous to all audiences, whether Jewish or Greek. To Jewish audiences, worshipping a crucified man was blasphemy. It was about as kosher as pork sausages wrapped in bacon served to Jews for a jihad fundraiser. To Greeks, worshipping a man recently raised from the dead was like doing obeisance to the first zombie you met in a zombie apocalypse. And it just keeps going in that sort of sarcastic way. Like, they wouldn't do that, which is kind of what Wright says in a more academic way.
Yeah.
But so it's a nice counterpart to Ehrman's.
Oh, that's
Ehrman's.
I didn't know about these two books, but I see that they're just kind of juxtaposed to each other. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so they have a very similar front as well, as you can see. The illustration of this one is very similar to Ehrman's.
Interesting.
I
didn't know about Michael Bird's book. That's interesting.
So they call Ehrman a celebrity skeptic, and I'm like, what is it with people calling other people with an opinion celebrity, like celebrity skeptic, celebrity atheist, like
celebrity pastor?
Well, yeah, I mean, I could probably call Justin Brearley. I know you're watching, Justin. I could call him a celebrity Christian probably, and because that's how that would work. I don't know why the celebrity atheist and celebrity stuff. Like, okay, they're vocal people.
Yeah.
We used to call them militants, and now it's celebrity or career. Yeah.
Well, yeah, career atheist, or I'd call Justin Brearley. I'd call him a career evangelical, because that's kind of. I mean, he's not a pastor. He doesn't pastor a church, but he's a big part of his persona in public is an evangelical or a Christian posture, a celebrity Christian. So I think that's apt. I don't think it's a put down.
No, it wasn't intended as such. I like what Justin does.
Yeah, well, so do I. I don't know how to watch this, but he's on Twitter, so
who knows? Yeah. Okay. So I wonder what you think of Ehrman.
Ehrman's interesting. Ehrman is good for bringing up the. Every position needs a spokesman. So Ehrman is kind of the modernist classical. Now, when I say classical theological liberal spokesperson for that school of biblical studies. There are many people who, I mean, there's all these camps in terms of Bible scholarship, and Ehrman is representing this one particular group. And you will find, Justin Brearley, his whole show is about, you bring on Bart Ehrman and then you bring on the other side and you have them talk back and forth, and you ask NT Wright what he thinks of Bart Ehrman, and on and on. Ehrman is in many ways, I listened to the talk that he did with Sam Harris, which was very interesting. And the two main takeaways I heard from that were Bart Ehrman sharing his deconversion story, which didn't surprise me at all, and Sam Harris's real ignorance about the Bible. That's what really surprised me. I thought a celebrity atheist would know a little bit more about the Bible than he did, but he didn't know much. But, Bart Ehrman, many people have followed Bart Ehrman's path in terms of he became a fundamentalist evangelical Christian with some pretty, I would say, fundamentalistic, modernistic approaches to the Bible, and they got deconstructed. The more complexity he began to see in the systems. Now, there is a whole range of conversation in that area. Peter Enns is another guy whose name comes up often, and Peter Enns is teaching at Eastern College. And so now there's a new wave of, I call them often progressive evangelicals, people like Rachel Held Evans, who grew up in a very fundamentalist group and then sees more of the complexities and the complex historical background of the Bible and kind of turns to a skeptical posture. There are a lot of people in that. See, I wasn't raised that tightly fundamentalistic. In my tradition, we always understood that, so my tradition comes through the likes of Herman Bavinck, and Abraham Kuyper, both of whom in their younger years, at the end of that, embraced a 19th century modern theological liberalism and saw that as a dead end, and then began to ask, well, then how then does the Bible work? And so, other movements came out of that. Karl Bart came out of that. That's more the neo-Orthodox movement and the Niebuhrs. But Abraham Kuyper and Herman Bavinck, they're more the Dutch Reformed. They're more the part of the Dutch Reformed movement. And it was interesting when my grandfather was, my grandfather was born in the United States. His father was an immigrant. And when my grandmother was whittling down his library, the last 4 books he had were Kuyper's Systematic Theology in Dutch and Bavinck's Systematic Theology in Dutch. But he preferred Bavinck because he said he was sweeter. And so, Christianity's been wrestling with these traditions for a long time because our culture sets us up with expectations for how the Bible should communicate to us. And the Bible communicates to us from its own culture and background. But when we try to fit it into, make it, contemporary history, they didn't know contemporary history. So then you have all these questions about historicity. And so that's where all this stuff comes out of. And I've often found that I don't like either extremes. The fundamentalists make me nervous because I think they try to make the Bible fit contemporary frames. But the modernists, I don't find them helpful in terms of what I want from the Bible, which is I want to inhabit it. I don't just want to say, oh, here's how the Bible confirms all my preconceived notions of goodness. I can't go there. So I'm kind of like Bavinck and Kuyper in that I see the modernists and I understand their points, and I very much understand that the Bible does not communicate to us the way we would maybe want it to. But if I'm going to, I still believe the Holy Spirit can use the Bible to give me a living faith that can actually do the kind of transformation we were talking about earlier in this conversation. That through the Bible, God can change me into being the kind of person that exhibits the love and power of Jesus Christ. That's what I want.
Okay. I'm trying to work through it. Hang on. I want to engage what you just said, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
I might not understand it completely. You're saying you're trying to apply the Bible to your life where it makes sense, or?
I try to understand the Bible, but I read it as someone who was born in 1963.
Okay, fair enough.
In New Jersey, and was the son of, Jews hiding in Dutch Calvinism. And, but what do I want from the Bible? I want the renovation of heaven and earth. I want God to rend the sky, and I want suffering to end. And I want, I want the renovation of heaven and earth, and I don't want anything less. And I want that to live in and through me. And I believe that, the Bible is how God is a big part of how God, the Bible and the Holy Spirit are how God gets in and changes me. Otherwise, so I was just watching Peterson's talk with the General McChrystal, and Peterson talked about you need something out there. And I think that's exactly right. And so the Bible gives me direction out there, but it's the Holy Spirit using the Bible to change me. And so what I want nothing less than the redemption of all of human history and the renovation of heaven and earth. And I want God to use me for that. That's what I want. Now, there's lots of other questions along the way. Bart Ehrman can raise good questions, and Michael Bird and Craig Effins can get in that conversation. So it's smart of you to read both of them. But fundamentally, see, this is another thing that you discover by virtue of who I am and that I have this brain and the education, the world I live in. I'm going to have to figure this stuff out. But I've seen God use other people that, like the pastor who actually Uncle Tom was fashioned after, or this mentor that Frederick Douglass have. I've been reading a biography of Frederick Douglass. God uses people who know almost nothing. And that's where you have Mabel and Paul. So you have Paul, who's this incredibly brilliant, zealot of a man, and Mabel, a disabled woman in a nursing home. And God uses them both to renovate this sinful, suffering world. And so part of what he's going to use me is wrestling with these issues, but that's not the real show. The real show is the redemption of heaven and earth.
Well, it's like you're a pastor, man. You said that right.
Yeah, I don't have to scratch real hard to get me preaching.
This might hook into a question that you might not be able to ask, not be able to answer. So last time I said, so how do you get to Jesus? And I didn't phrase it properly. The question was, how did you get there?
Well, I think part of it, my parents gave me Jesus, and they gave me Jesus in who they were and how they lived. And I can barely talk about that without crying, because it's, I watched, and my parents were different from each other, but, my father would give the shirt off his back and the food from his table. And my mother said, no, but I'm not going to let my children starve. And so they played this dance in Peterson, and loving the people, the Black community of Peterson, New Jersey, that were desperately poor and subject to all kinds of things going on. So Jesus got to me through my parents. Jesus got to me through the church that I grew up in and through the Christian school that I went to. But not just those things. Jesus also got to me individually. And, we talked, I've been talking about psychedelics a little bit. Jesus got to me through dreams. Jesus got to me through people in my life. We always get accustomed to what we're around. So I was used to Peterson, New Jersey, and I was used to Dutch Calvinism in the Christian Reformed Church. But then I meet evangelicals and Pentecostals, and I'd see new aspects of Jesus in them that I didn't have. And so I wanted some of that. And then I went to the Dominican Republic, and I saw Haitian pastors that will never have a chance at very much in this world and in this life, but they had Jesus. And so Jesus came to me through them. And then, Jesus comes to me through the homeless, and Jesus comes to me, and Jesus has come to me through Jordan Peterson. And Jesus comes to me through you. So no, Jesus is a hunter, and he will stalk you, and he will have you. And and C.S. Lewis talks in these terms. And at some point, we become his bride, and we long to be ravished by him. So I know that's getting weird, but this is why God is God and we are not.
So that hooks into the talk you gave about axiomatic God and materialistic God. I think the reason I could integrate that so easily is because it's essentially what I didn't know then, but that's natural theology. And God is in everything, and God is in us as we treat each other well, and God is love, and this and that. That works because there's nothing outside. But that's not what you believe. And I've seen your talk about natural theology, the one that Peterson is building.
Yeah.
And
no, it is what I believe. But see, here's the problem with, again, being a theologian, because you tend to want to clean up that language. Because, let's say that Isaiah chapter 6, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, which says God is apart from all of this. And he's holy. He's holy, 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 the Old Testament says. And the whole earth is full of his glory. So is God in? Yes, sort of. But there's also a way that God is separate. And that's where Christianity parts ways with pantheism, because the difficulty we have with the God in type of language is that it can reduce God. And the holy, holy, holy means, oh yeah, he's coming to you in all kinds of strange ways and in ways and places and things you would never expect. But he's also separate and acting in and through. So that's where, is God in this? Sure. And that's why sometimes people will say to me, this is why I give evangelicals a hard time, well, that's a God thing. And I said, what? As opposed to the rest of creation? Isn't all of creation a God thing as opposed to humanity? So it's the theologians get fussy about language because they want to preserve distinctions. But in our common talk, you can say that because, yeah, of course, God is in. God is all over the place. He is everywhere. Well, what do we mean by that? So it gets complicated, but that's why to have an education means getting fussy about things.
Okay. Darn. Okay. So I guess I still need to, I'm not sure where I was going with the question. I was trying to figure out where the natural theology ends and the other part begins, but I guess that's fuzzy. And maybe I'm trying to control it too much, the distinction between it.
I don't think natural theology is a bad enterprise at all. I think we need it. And I think that's us seeing God's glory through what he has done. But Christianity has always said natural theology will only get you so far. If God had to wait for us to make our way to him, we would never get there. And that's part of the point of the incarnation of Jesus, that God, and the point of the whole Bible, God keeps butting in. And even that language isn't right, because it's not that he's been absent. So it's just terribly hard to talk about.
No, I imagine it is, and it, because you also don't know how to interpret it and when to distinguish it from whatever else is happening in a system at work. But and at some point it becomes all vague and metaphysical, and then Vervaeke is like, oh, but did you think about this? I'm like, no, I don't want to, because I mean, and the weird split brain experiments, and at some point you're like, because like I've had enough worldview shaking for a while now, and seriously, I'm still trying to find ground. I'm trying to reestablish my axioms, and I keep finding none. That's really frustrating, because like, well, I used to have some, but that it's like I'm in some boat and my nice atheism paddle broke, and like, well, now I'm just kind of drifting off. I'm like, well, let's see where this goes.
Or maybe it's the current.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, that atheism paddle enabled a fantasy that you were steering your boat.
That too. Yeah, I knew you were going to say something like that. But the more I watch about your videos, I think we were dead on there. About, okay, life definitely is a certain way. I know it is, and well, and this is fun. Why again? And now it's just all sorts of fun, even though I am less sure of anything than before. But let's not go there. Stop amusing yourself.
No, you're amusing me.
Speaking of which, I finished Miracles.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the epilogue.
So
Lewis is such a jackass, Paul. Seriously, do you recall that epilogue? I'll read it for the rest of the people who might be watching this. Let's see, because I was talking with Esther about this, so I shared it with her. I can't do the English accent, so I'll just read it. Perhaps, if I dare suppose so much, you have been led on at times while you were reading, have felt ancient hopes and fears stir in your heart, have perhaps come almost to the threshold of belief. But now, no, it just won't do. Here's the ordinary, here's the real world, around you again. The dream is ending, as all other similar dreams have always ended. For of course, this is not the first time such a thing has happened. More than once in your life before this, you have heard a strange story, read some odd book, seen something queer, or imagined you have seen it, entertained some wild hope or terror, but always it ended in the same way, and always you wondered how you could, even for a moment, have expected it not to, for that real world, when you came back to, is so unanswerable. For that real world, when you came back to it, is so unanswerable. Of course the strange story was false. Of course the voice was really subjective. Of course the apparent portent was a coincidence. You're ashamed of yourself for having ever thought otherwise. Ashamed, relieved, amused, disappointed, and angry all at once. You ought to have known that, as Arnold says, miracles don't happen. That guy's just having way too much fun with his audience. Seriously.
You know, it's so yesterday in the video I made yesterday, I read some of C.S. Lewis's The Last Battle. In the Lewis, in the group of people who study Lewis, there's a vibrant debate about why on earth he wrote those Narnia books. Because why should a single professor write children's books when he didn't even like children? He didn't get along with children. And Tolkien, of course, hated the Narnia books because Tolkien was such a craftsman, and he crafts Middle Earth. And Lewis is like a kid and he's like Andy in Toy Story. He's bringing all the toys and throwing them in the story. And Tolkien's like, no, that's all wrong. And Tolkien's like, allegory's terrible. And Lewis is like, why the Witch of the Wardrobe? That's an allegory. But why did Lewis do it? I think part of it, he no longer wrote these apologetic books like Miracles. And I think he decided that Tolkien was right. Now, Lewis was no Tolkien. He wasn't the kind of, he didn't have that kind of power like Tolkien had. And his best novel is Till We Have Faces, which is a retelling of a myth. So Narnia is, I think, probably his attempt at apologetic work, because he understood that in many ways, faith comes to us through the children that we are. And so he puts it in children's books. And it's Lewis, it's the little boy C.S. Lewis that in a sense we get in those books. And no, he's quite a character. That book that I think I told you about last time, about Joy Davidman. Oh my goodness, what a pistol she was too. And you know, it's just a crazy life. But the world is crazy. I mean, we know this. Look at you. Look at me.
You said that last time. I made a note of it. Like, real life is so much crazier, and you're like, yeah, no kidding. There's all this stuff here. I did order the Narnian, by the way, because you suggested it. It hasn't come in yet. But Esther's also been saying, you need to read Narnia. You need to read. Have you started reading Narnia yet? I'm like, no, I'm going to read the Narnian first. She's like, well, that might have spoilers.
Wow.
But yeah, she says the Narnia books are also really good.
They are and they aren't. You know, I read them, I reread them from time to time. And when I was a kid, my father sat down and read through them to us. Myself and my younger sister, we were a little young. We didn't sit through them. My older sister sat through them all. But they're interesting books. They're very English. They're very mid-century English. And so I'm surprised they've worn as well as they have, but there's gold in there.
Well, at some point I'll probably read them once I get through the pile of all the other books I need to read. I did order NT Wright Surprised by Hope, which seemed a good book. It's a lot thicker than I thought it would be. So, oh boy.
That's one of his best.
Yeah, I think you recommended it to me. I think that's why I ordered it.
Yeah, that's a helpful one. People get caught up in eschatology, end times, and life of the age to come, and Wright goes into a lot of that there and cleans up a lot of stuff. So it's good. It's good.
It must be very interesting to be. This is always going to sound weird. It is but I'm trying to word that I'm curious towards your perspective on existence, because your perspective on existence is different from mine. Like you have this idea of a grand narrative, or not even idea. You have a belief in a grand narrative, a purpose, an existence out of here that like I don't have, and I just wonder how that manifests itself as to what you do, or how you interact with it's a weird question because it's too vague, but it's something I keep thinking about. Like, what's a week in your life look like?
Well, I wish I could say that the grand narrative permeated my week more than you might observe that it did. You're right that I live believing we are characters in the most unbelievable story, which is the story of this world and the story of humanity. And it's this enormous book, and I'm just this tiny little page over here. But how does that manifest in my week? Well, I think in many ways it helps. I mean, I have all the same things to do as anyone else. Now I have a particular kind of job, so I'm a pastor. Now I'm making YouTube videos and talking to people all around the world, which is a totally strange thing. But part of the reason that is affordable in my life is because of the big story. People in church, if people in church were bean counters, they might say, well, who are these Jordan Peterson people? And if they're not giving money to the church, you shouldn't meet with them. And last night we had a meetup, and James, who I'd done a video with, he said, I'm curious as to what your church thinks about all of this, because a lot of churches would say, you're meeting with 10 or 15 men, the church is paying for the heat, the church is paying for the lights, but we're not having a Bible study. So does the church consider this a men's group? And I would say yes. And the reason the church sees that is because the church sees the big story. And so when we spend our evening talking about things that don't necessarily fit and turn inside a narrow church script, the big story helps us see that this is all part of something, as are my videos, as are our talk right now. So, and I've noticed that, so one of the interesting things is that if I talk to people about what I'm doing who aren't Christians, they almost always ask me, well, they always are curious about the money angle of it. And so it would be, you know, well, if I'm going to talk to Job, I'm going to talk to Job for an hour and a half. So I'm going to have to charge him my almost a therapist fee for an hour and a half. It doesn't work like that. And my church, you know, my church sees my conversation with you as ministry. And what that does is it translates it into this grand story. And the same for my father's ministry in Peterson. He spent hours and hours and hours helping people who never, ever would join our church and never did. But that's that participation in that story. And so what that story does is reorganize the economy. Now I've got kids, I've got, how do you have time to listen to audiobooks and do dishes and YouTubes? I have dishes to do. I have kids to pick up. I have errands to run. And usually the things that actually get in the way of my YouTube stuff are the other ministry stuff. I have to go visit someone. Someone's in the hospital. So, but that's all part of the big story. And so now in my life, people say, well, you're a minister, so that affects you directly. Yes. But for lay people, it's part of what they do is they support and contribute to this ministry. And that's part of it. That enables me to be freed up to do these things. But part of it is that they themselves see themselves in this story. And part of our tradition as well means that the rice farmer in Sacramento is growing food for people. That's part of the story. The state worker is helping the state of California be a more just state. That's part of the story. And so whether you're designing software or growing rice or working in a state office, you're all contributing to this story. And the way Christ shapes us changes. Again, you can look at Abraham Kuyper and Herman Bavinck for a lot of this theology too. Abraham Kuyper says there's no square inch of this whole story that Jesus doesn't say, that's mine, and I am going to use this. Now, then there's all the hard parts of the story. And you don't have a good story without the hard parts. And the amazing things is Jesus comes in there and says, I will use that too. And I will take the suffering and I will turn it into glory. And that's why the center of Christianity is this crucifixion and resurrection, because he takes suffering and turn it into glory. So that's how ideally everything that I do, even the mundane things, gets brought into this big story that is the story of humanity and the world.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. Yeah, I really don't. I'm trying, seriously.
It's okay. It's fine. It's a lot to just dump into a conversation, I know, but that's
I asked.
Because, and I think story is the right way. You have a story, and what's happening in your life over the last couple of years is, well, your story has taken a surprising turn, a turn you could not have imagined. It's been a happy turn. Well, there'll be some sad turns. And then you have to figure out, what do all these turnings mean, the happy and the sad ones? And that's where we get into meaning. What's the meaning of all of this? So, and I think, again, Lewis is helpful. Actually, Lewis didn't think of this. It was Dorothy Sayers, who was a fiction writer. She was the one, she's probably not the first one, but she was the one who brought it to Lewis and said, think about God this way as the author. And, so I'm in the Gospel of Mark and I'm preaching through that. And the people say, we've never seen someone teaching with authority. What's the root word of authority? Author. But what does that mean? It means Jesus is the author of that. So he's the author of you. He's the author of me. But again, we as secular people, no, I'm the author of me. And I think, yeah, right. Yeah, right.
No, I pretty much got walloped with you think you have any say in all these things and you don't. You kind of just have this, you're kind of drifting on the current. You sometimes kind of paddle with your hands and you think it helps. Yeah, speaking of Jesus, that's an interesting way to start a sentence. he goes to, I think it's in Luke, it's in at least 2 Gospels. He goes into a synagogue and starts preaching, takes the scroll of Isaiah, I think. Isaiah. Says, okay, this and this and that. By the way, that's me. Basically what he says. That's about this guy. And he sits down, drops the mic, sits down. And people are like, isn't that Joseph's kid? Yeah, what's up with him?
Let's throw him off a cliff.
Yeah, right. Well, especially in John, the Jews are like, it's like everybody carries a bag of rocks with them all the time. It's like, he said something, rocks. It's very much like Twitter. They just own them.
Well, but again, this is context, because talk to people. I've never been to Israel, but everyone I know says, the reason they're always stoning is because there's stones all over the place. Just look at that stone.
Yeah. It's the more you read about the guy, it's like, if there's any kernel of truth to it, it's quite someone.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm gonna stand here and that's me.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. And he's a Jew saying this. That's the crazy part. I mean, this is the Jews had monotheism beaten into them for 500 years. And then Jesus comes along and says, Yahweh, I am. And people are like, stone?
Yep. Yeah, and there's a lot of passages where like Jews are ready to grab their stones and they turn around and Jesus has run off. And probably his apostles would be like, all right, let's get him out of here because there's a stoning coming. Yeah. Oof. We got 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, a little less than. I should take 5 minutes because my dog is whining at me because I think he wants to go outside, and if he does something in the house, I'm gonna have to clean it up.
Yeah, that's your responsibility, Paul. Let's pick up that cross. So you were listening to, or you were making a video on Vervaeke. I just finished your last one before this talk started. I liked what he had to say about flow.
Yeah.
As a software developer, there's something we call the zone. And any software developer listening to this will like, yeah, that zone, I know what that is. We also call it the flow, the zone. We usually think in data structures and logic, and you build these whole data narratives in your head. And you can, when you're really in the zone, you can string them in your mind as just, you can see all the data go and and you can just, code just flows from your fingers. And it's a beautiful feeling.
Yeah.
Like all of previous week, I just had done lots of managing, didn't really get to coding. So I told Mallory, like, this weekend I'm going to code. I haven't been in the zone all week and I need to be in the zone for a while. And Vervaeke is talking about, why do we want that so bad? Like, yeah, well, I just figured that was a programmer thing. I mean, we're in an industry that selects strongly for people who can focus for a long time on very logical stuff. So we're full of nerds. That's basically what the industry wants. That's what we select on. Do you like puzzles? Yes. Do you like to do puzzles all day? Yes. Come work for us. Sit here, we'll feed you sandwiches and solve the puzzles. But yeah, of course, that's the art thing. That's the writing thing. That's the building Legos thing. Anything we can that the part of the brain likes to latch on to. Yeah, I'm sure that. I mean, you said you had ADHD, and I'm sure you have periods of that hyper focus that I've heard people talk about.
Yep.
I was diagnosed with ADD as a kid, so it's more the distract. I was a dreamer as a kid. Worst, like teachers didn't know what to do with me. I was always lost in my own little fantasy world. And then I read Freud because I was reading Jung, and Jung says, well, those daydreams, that's a manifestation of desire. Those are wants and desires. Like if I think about them, yeah, I was always like I was somebody with power and competence in my childful daydreams. Like that's that ideal that you want. And that you hear Peterson, you hear Jung, and then suddenly everything makes sense because there's meaning to work towards, and it all connects. It's just, and then for Fake, it's like, yep, then we have no idea about any of this, and then you have very similar insights in that sort of metaphors and symbolism, and of course Jonathan Peugeot, and it's a wild ride, man, all these videos. So
it is a wild ride.
Please keep making them. It's yeah. And I wonder if Peterson's mystical experience was a similar breakthrough in that he was so deeply focused on what he was doing. What did you think that was?
Well, he shared a number of them.
Really?
Well, he shared the one that he had, the dream or vision that he had about the cathedral in Montreal. There was the one that he did on that podcast. There was the one of that he was going to fight the devil, and so he shared a number of visions and dreams that he's had. I think people, on one hand, there are two. I'm very much like C.S. Lewis on this. On one hand, to dismiss them, that's just dumb. But to make them the be all and end all, that's dumb too. They're data. They tell us things. They tell us important things. And there's always experience and interpretation. And interpretation is always interpretation, and experience is experience. So you take it and you look at it and you say, huh. And it's kind of what you do with the Bible too. You look at it and you say, huh, oh, here comes the next one.
We're just talking about Peterson. Hello. Oh, yeah. No, come back.
Oops.
That's fine.
No, I feel bad because I always think, oh, I got to remember to lock the meeting so that they don't just have that panicked, tortured look like, there's people in here. Oh.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah.
So I listen to him, and I think some people are. I think that's a big part of Peterson. It's a big part of why he always leaves the door open when Sam Harris demands that he not go there, and Peterson say, I can't shut that door, Sam. I can't just dismiss all this. There's something there. I may not be able to explain it, but I can't deny it. And I think that's just being honest.
And it ties in with what you said about psychedelics. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe it's all just the brain talking to each other, like Reiki also said.
Yeah.
And it, at the one hand, that's kind of the fallacy of always being in the mean, like never making a real. But about these things of which we know so little, I guess there's not much else we can do.
Yeah.
Just drift along on the current.
I think there's a maker. I think someone has made the current, and I think that's why the story metaphor, the story narrative helps me, because is there an author? And I to have there not be an author, that if I would truly believe that would be hard, because I think that would then change what I do every day.
Oh, coming from the other side, it changes everything. And I'm not willing to say there isn't one anymore. But all the other, well, I'm sure we'll have another conversation about this.
I'm sure we will.
I'll let you go. I'll let you go walk the dog. Say hi to John for me.
All right, and hey, hopefully see you in March.
Yeah, should work out. If if everything goes well.
If everything goes
Thanks
well.
again for a delightful conversation, man. Really good to see you.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you. Say hi to your wife for me.
I will. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.